Good afternoon. My name is Brett Tucker, and I am a technical manager of cyber risk management at the Software Engineering Institute within Carnegie Mellon University. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about artificial intelligence and risks related to it. The name of my presentation is really a new mousetrap, exploring risks with artificial intelligence. This title is not an error. I'd like to make an argument or a case now and toward the end of the presentation to bring up the idea that AI is a technology. It's great. It is exciting. It's been around for a while, and it's kind of coming back again to haunt us as our technology and our savvy gets better. But we should really be treating it just as much as we treat any other technology risk, new technologies that we bring into organizations. So let's kind of go through that and talk about what we think about risk and how we would apply it to this new great technologies that's coming more into its own. First, let's level set the entire audience here as to what I mean by risk. And there's a lot to be discussed here, but let's just start with the idea that risk is nothing more than an uncertainty, right? We live in times of uncertainty, and I got to tell you, I'm going to break your bubble here, that the risk environment is really not contracting. If anything, we are seeing a lot more of this uncertainty come about as we have these grand shifts in technology, and as we have things like pandemics that take place, right? We recognize that we're living in this environment that's ever shifting, and we really need to learn to adapt. We need to learn to survive that uncertainty. And we do that through a process, and hopefully as I go through this, you'll see a more standardized process, so that way we can make better decisions. Ultimately, that's the goal. We want to make risk-informed decisions, right? And that awareness is going to take us there. Now, I want to say one other thing about risk that I want you to keep in mind, because AI is a great technology. It has lots of opportunity to it. So remember, that uncertainty can be linked to a threat just as much as an opportunity. Things that can impact our enterprise negatively, just as much as things that are uncertain that can affect us positively and give us like some kind of uptick for our organization. So at the end of the day, what we really can only account for here is the fact that uncertainty exists. But the good news is that we can decompose it. And we can think about risk in a lot of different ways, the way we define it, right? But for today, let's just argue that risk is an uncertainty that's going to result in some kind of consequence that's going to lead to an impact, a way that we feel pain, if you will, right? So that risk, or that consequence, that impact is going to come about from some threat, some actor. Now, by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be a human being as an actor. We recognize that there could be a force majeure kind of event that could take place, like a tornado, a hurricane, a pandemic, something like that that's going to come along, and it could be external to our organization, or it could be like an insider threat, somebody within the organization who is acting maliciously, or it could be somebody who is just maybe ignorant and makes a mistake. We all make mistakes. It could be the case, right? And these risks, they happen within an environment. Some kind of condition has to exist. Now, in cyberspace, we all know this in terms of being a vulnerability. And those of us who are familiar with the recent SolarWinds event and all that, we've found that there are grand vulnerabilities to be found in our systems that we are using. Our assets are plagued with them. So these conditions exist, and we must address them. We must identify them. And if we can take that wheel or that cog out of this mesh here, we can find that we could really kind of limit or mitigate our exposure to that risk. If we were to eliminate all threats, educate our people so that there's no such thing as a mistake that can be made in our enterprise. Or we could, as another example, dial away all impact. Maybe we make it so that we don't necessarily feel pain if a risk does come to fruition. Either way, we're going to treat these conditions and these elements of risk such that we can respond to them and eliminate or reduce, actually. We'll never completely eliminate risk, right? There will always be residual, but we'll reduce that exposure. And remember I said that the good news is that we can address these risks in a standardized manner. That said, this is a very, very general process for addressing any risk. I'd like to point you, I have a reference slide at the very end of this for those interested, that I just wrote a publication, a technical note for Octave Forte, which is a standardized risk management process for enterprise risk and organization, connecting CISOs to enterprise risk in a better sense. But there are other frameworks that can be used. Risk management framework, FAIR has a great process. So whatever you decide to use, you're going to find that they all have roughly these same elements, right? We're going to plan for the plan. We're going to identify our risks. We're going to analyze them. So we're going to assume that this process has been done with artificial intelligence today as we're going to talk about it, right? But I can't say more, I can't provide any more greater emphasis that you want to attack this problem in a standardized manner, much like you would any other risk in your enterprise. Sure, AI may be special, it's got great benefits, or maybe it's something that your organization has never seen before, but you must approach it as you would have all of your other risks. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the matter at hand, right? The technology piece, the artificial intelligence side. Now, we have lots of great experts at the Software Engineering Institute that specialize in artificial intelligence, and I am not necessarily one of them. So I don't lay claim to that. I am a risk expert though, and I would argue that as I've gone down this path, I've learned a little bit. The fact that it's a new technology, obviously that's an obvious one, right? But I have learned for sure that AI, much like other technologies that we've seen in the past, are truly here to be a market disruptor, right? And maybe not even a market disruptor, it could be a geopolitical disruptor. I mean, think about militaries using this, this kind of technology and application in the battlefield, for example, which could be a very significant concern. So we know that we have to address these risks, not only in terms of how it's implemented in the organization, how it's being used, but also how we're ingesting this as a new asset into the organization, right? Once again, let's revisit this idea that if we can dial away the impact, if we can make it so that we don't feel the pain, or maybe we eliminate the threat actor, or maybe at some point we can control the fact that we have no vulnerabilities, or we've controlled the condition, that we've overall reduced that risk exposure. And that's what we're shooting for in this regard, okay? So there are a couple ways that I've sliced and diced artificial intelligence and thought of some high-level risks that you may want to address in your registers, your risk register, right? I'm going to go through each of these at greater detail, but I want you to note that these items that I have listed here, an ill-defined problem statement that has, maybe there's a lack of expertise in the organization, and then maybe there's challenges with the model and the way that we have the system managing the data within that model. Maybe we have unrealistic expectations from stakeholders, and once again, there's challenges with data, lack of the ability to verify the model. Whatever the case may be, these are all connected in a sense, right? You don't want to deny yourself the ability to identify the interdependency between each of these elements and understand that as I'm addressing one risk, there may be benefit that I'm addressing multiple others. So you may hear things repeated, but that's important that you're hearing solutions being repeated from one risk to another, because there's going to be an efficiency or a savings on the economy of scale here. Okay, so let's go into the details here and talk about each of these. Let's talk about an ill-defined problem statement. And I love to think about this in terms of the pandemic that we were just recently suffering with COVID, for example, right? Nobody really would have thought in 2019 that there would be a pandemic that would be so profound as to bring our economy to a halt. And I would challenge any of you that it would be really, I don't know, a shift of your paradigm or a disruptor for you to start thinking about, well, how does that pandemic play in my organization? I mean, have I thought of all the elements? Have I thought about how other organizations interface with me and how they're impacted? So now you have a supply chain risk management issue. You know, all this goes to the idea of how you're defining your problem statement. It's not just the pandemic. There are other little pieces to it, right? And artificial intelligence is no different, right? Once again, you have this matter where you're ingesting this asset, this technology asset into your organization. And as you bring this technology in, you have a provider, some kind of supply chain element that is going to be helping you with that implementation. Maybe you're buying off-the-shelf product. Maybe you have someone that's actually developing it for you, or maybe you're developing it in-house. That said, whoever it is that's helping you do this, whether it's internal or external, they need to understand what the problem is that you're trying to address with this technology, right? They need to get into your head and do a deep, deep search of requirements exploration here to understand where you're going with it and what you want to get out of it, right? And this all comes down to great requirements exploration, let's face it too, if you don't understand a problem in its entirety, it's always best to decompose it, chunk it up, right? If we put it into little parts and we address each little part and maybe use AI as just one element of a solution for one part, we've effectively diluted that risk that may be rooted in the whole process, right? In other words, if we don't use AI and other elements of this problem that we've decomposed, if this one part goes wrong, maybe it won't end our whole reality or our whole existence of our organization, right? It won't be as threatening. So we want to bring it in a migratory sense. And that brings me to this idea that you may also want to consider an agile implementation of some sort, right? Let's take it a step at a time, if you will. And let's bring in pieces and parts and understand how those pieces and parts are interacting in our organization. And that way we can really kind of get on top of this idea that we're understanding the problem as we get smarter about its implementation piece by piece with this agile implementation. Okay, and we all know this. You guys are all sitting in this audience, whether you're at home or maybe you're with a group of folks, and you know that you've come from a very rigored background. All of us have in this particular path, right? Whether you're homegrown and you learn to be a hacker in your basement, you still put in the effort, and it took a lot to learn that technology. Or whether you've gone through those advanced degrees and you have just a profound body of expertise for elements of cybersecurity and maybe even artificial intelligence, that pedigree was not easy. It was not easy to achieve, right? So as you get that, you understand too that this is a team sport and you cannot be the only person in the organization that's doing this work. If you are, by the way, that's a risk in and of itself because you're a linchpin, right? If something happens to you, the organization is going to come to a screeching halt. So we understand that we need more people with the skills and abilities that are related to this artificial intelligence as a tool, right? And I mean, think about all the pieces that go with that. I mean, we have people who have expertise in data collection, in system engineering, and model development, and even just problem definition, right? You need great mathematicians, you need people who understand how to decompose these things. And they're not easy to find. Okay, so how do we address this, right? What are we gonna do? I would argue that all organizations should have a strong human resource strategy in terms of how you do recruiting, where are you doing the recruiting from? And you're going to say, well, Brett, this is not really artificial intelligence. This is all risks. Aha. Once again, this is one of those elements where it's broadly applicable across many different technology risks or risks in general, right? All organizations struggle with this. But it's very profound, obviously, with artificial intelligence because there are high demands here. And you're going to have to consider, you know, what kind of resources you can bring to the table to hire these people that bring this special expertise to the table. So that said, do not deny the fact that you have people within your organization who may be thirsting to understand artificial intelligence more, who are looking for those additional opportunities. And there's benefit in that, right? Rather than going to the street and bringing somebody in and educating them on your organization and getting them oriented with your culture and your mission, try to find people in-house that you can educate and provide that a little boost of help. Maybe you send them to an RSA conference, maybe you send them to school and have that intellect and have that skill set fostered in-house. But it takes time. This is a long game, right? It's strategic. So you can't just go tactically make decisions about educating your workforce. It takes thought, it takes time and energy. This is a big one to be putting time and energy to. Okay, so let's talk about customers now, because we've talked about we think we had a problem and we know that we have people that can address that problem, we believe. And at the same time, we know that there's going to be somebody who's paying the bills, right? And let's face it, anyone who's worked on any kind of project before knows that customer expectations can be challenging at times, right? There's a lot of talk about documenting requirements, and you put it in a nice special tool. You actually even tie them off to the function that you have. And this is going back to that agile development piece, right? And we address each requirement one element at a time. And yet you run into this challenge here where the customer's not happy. I mean, I like to think of this actually in terms of new Coca-Cola. Remember anybody from back in the 80s when we had new Coke, right? And Coca-Cola came out with this great product. They're modifying their recipe, and it was a complete and utter failure, right? And it was because the customers had different expectations. You know, they had a product in mind that they wanted to be satisfied not only in taste, but it had to have that certain je ne sais quoi to it, that certain element of this is Coca-Cola in my mind as I'm tasting it. And they didn't make that connection. And we could talk about that, and not just the soft drink industry. You know, I think of, you know, Crystal Pepsi and all those great products that have gone to pass. But we can think about this in other industries as well, right? Where the customer set came in and they had these great ideas of things that they wanted and just didn't get it. Artificial intelligence is no different, right? So we need to educate our customers. We need them to understand that the things that we're having done with this technology, and that is decision making, right? Automated decision making that's taking place at just a faster rate than what humans would, and maybe even a little more standardized. Maybe it's got the ability to ingest data at greater rates, faster than human could, and make decisions. That all said, the customer needs to understand that that's being done with technology that could be flawed, right? There are decisions that still could be made improperly because, you know, maybe your model is flawed, or maybe your data is poisoned. And a customer must understand that as they're getting this artificial intelligence technology and they're using it, that their expectations may not necessarily be made, okay? So once again, as we're educating these customers, and we understand, or they understand better what they're getting, they have to understand too that their risk appetite may be changing. Now, risk appetite, let's go back and visit that for a second, is the amount of risk that we're willing to take into an organization, right? So you have to tell your customer, hey, you're bringing in this new technology and it may make a mistake and it may cost you X dollars, or it may be a detriment to the safety of employees in the organization. And right there, the customers put on notice. They're like, whoa, wait a second, how is that the case? And you start talking about, well, let's face it, we're making decisions on how equipment is going to function. And if that equipment should happen to harm somebody or do damage to your organization or your operations, you're going to run into some problems, and you need to understand how that's going to happen. That might right there stop the idea of an appetite space of an organization wanting to even adopt AI until it's better understood or until it's proven itself. Okay. Okay. So now you've convinced the customer, yes, AI is the thing you need. You got that team and they're educated and they know what they're doing, right? That said, you got to recognize too that your environment and your problem is always shifting. You may have defined it on one day, but the next day it is completely fallen apart. And this is, I think of the Mike Tyson, I think it's Mike Tyson who said, you know, a fight is great, and you think you have a great plan until you get punched in the face. Was it Tyson? I don't know. I'm not a big boxer, but let's face it, that's a truism for anything that you're working with here with respect to building models around problems, right? We're trying to figure out how we can use a model within a system that's going to use data, it's going to ingest it, and it's going to make decisions with that data, and it's going to take action. And we have to understand that if elements of that picture have changed within that model, and I like to think about maybe let's think about a battlefield, for example. We're making decisions real time on how to employ assets in a battlefield. Geography can change, weather can change. The enemy may use different tactics. All these things may go to impacting how your model was designed and the solution that it was seeking. So all that said, your risk is your uncertainty, and the execution of that model is being challenged time and again. So once again, what do we want to think about here? Well, clearly requirements exploration was a big thing, right? And by the way, it's not just the idea of requirements exploration up front as you're bringing the asset into the organization, but you realize that there's a life cycle to it along with the AI solution throughout its entire life. Things are always shifting, the environment is changing, and you need to have that requirements exploration process to never end. It needs to be iterative with the life of this technology that you're bringing in. But that said, you got to be smart about it, right? So you have to have a nimble software architecture and understand that as I'm bringing new elements into this model, that it's flexible enough to take these changes on and to operate and behave the way that I expect it, which can also in and of itself be challenging. So that way you may decide, okay, so if I'm going to be doing this, the software architecture needs to be developed in an iterative manner. So once again, this brings us back to that agile development idea, right? Let's get pieces together and understand how they work best, and then we'll start adding on incrementally. Okay, so now the exciting part, right? Now we talk about like real AI challenge in terms of data. And we all recognize that artificial intelligence thirsts for data. You know, you hear about lakes and pools and oceans of data, right? And there's a lot of different things to talk about here. Let's level set with the idea first that we all know that there's this notion of relevance of the data, right? And what we're speaking to there is how usable or how useful is that data that we're collecting for answering the solution or answering the problem that we're trying to solve, right? How best does it fit the model that we're using? And then you have to worry about, well, okay, is this information accurate? So the data, how good is it? And that could go to all types of questions. Where are you collecting it from? How are you collecting it? What kind of sensors are you using, right? Despite using the very correct sensor that I know I need, and despite going to the right location and getting it from the right spot, it could be victimized. I mean, the data could be poisoned. In other words, a threat actor will come in and they'll make changes, so they'll alter or do something to it to make it so that it is going to lead you down an improper path, or it's going to break your model and you're not going to get the right answers, right? There could be bias too in how your model was developed in terms of favoring one data set versus another, or elements of data sets that may be more important and have greater priority, right? That said, maybe you have a broken sensor, or maybe your strategy for implementation of those sensors is off, right? So you could have faulty data collection in that regard. And we always struggle with this idea of having enough data as well. So bear in mind too that a low volume of data could limit our ability to implement this artificial intelligence in the way that we want and see fit. So what are we going to do here? So there's a lot of things to think about here that I'm going to talk about. But that said, there's probably a whole lot more, okay? So let's just start at the real basic level of thinking about the model that you've developed and how the data is being used, how it's being collected, and how often do I have to refresh that data? You know where I think about this classically is with elections, and I'm not here to get political on you, but what I am to think about, trying to think about is you see polls that are happening leading up to an election like every week or something like that. That refresh rate is really high. And by the way, it's costing a whole lot of money, right? And the funny thing is you watch the polls, there's really not a lot of shift in one week to another. That said, you'll see too, where they'll show, oh, well, this poll was trending a while back in January, and now in November it's changed or it's shifted. So not only do you want to think about how often you're refreshing your data, but you want to think about, am I really going to want to expunge or get rid of old data? And if I do, how long ago? Is it temporal, or am I doing it based on quality? Am I doing it because I've changed up my model? So there's a lot of things to think about there in terms of how much of that are you going to keep. You're also going to think about, once you've collected it, how am I going to clean it? Data can be noisy, and we all know this, right? We see where you have aberrant data that's going to come in, and it's going to, maybe not fit the model that you're thinking, or maybe it's just noise, right? I like to, once again, thinking about those polls, you get people who have all different types of opinions, and some of that may not necessarily fit the question that you're even asking. So you're going to want to think about, how am I going to clean that data? How am I going to get to a point where my system can use it to make and discern a proper decision that I'm looking for? Now that costs a lot of money. It costs time. It takes special people who have training to sit down and look at it. Maybe you could automate elements of it, but at the end of the day, you're going to have somebody checking it, right? Some subject matter expert's going to have to come in and recognize that there's some elements of cleaning that's going to need to be done, okay? Once again, we're hitting upon the interdependency idea here too. Think back to the slide where I talked about the lack of expertise in an organization. You may hire analysts, but it's going to take some significant training for them to understand the data they're cleansing and what they're going to do with it, right? So something to keep in mind. Now, let's assume we've gotten this far and we even have something stood up and we even have decisions being made and the artificial intelligence is steaming right along in your enterprise and you've maybe automated decisions with respect to selecting configuration of controls in your security stack, which would be phenomenal, right? It's something that we would all want. Real-time controls solution for your organization such that it senses threats in the environment and it knows and understands and identifies vulnerabilities, and it's making these risk-based decisions to literally go in and change your control stack so that way the gates stay up at all times and the bad guys or bad girls are not getting into your organization. Be phenomenal, right? But I'm here to say that it's going to be really challenging to understand how you verify that the correct decisions are being made. Let me give you an example. Think about it this way. We all know that as we modify our control stack, that there's a balance that's struck there, right? As we limit the number of people that can come through our firewall and access the services that we're providing, as those controls are shifting, we may be blocking out some customers. We may be, as I've talked about before, making decisions, or the AI may be making decisions that are actually putting some customers in jeopardy. Maybe if they rely on your services for life-saving kind of services, this could be really important, right? So you want to think about, how is it that I'm prioritizing these decisions are being made? Am I educating the customer such that they know that the decisions being made are the ones that they need, are the ones that they want? Once again, go revisit the expectation slide and let's tie it all together. And you can see that this register really has some silver threads of commonality going through it, right? So what are some things that we can do here? Well, first of all, you have to have an understanding or know what you're expecting from the technology solution that you've selected, okay? And this goes back to the problem definition statement. What questions am I trying to answer and how do I expect them to be answered? This selection of cyber controls is a real pertinent example for you, right? We know that we want to keep out APTs or advanced persistent threats. We want to keep out folks from getting into our system, or bots from getting into our system and doing any significant damage, to think about that confidentiality, integrity, and availability idea. Okay, fair enough, right? But that said, we know that our appetite for those things may be changing over time. Maybe we have data in our system that has maybe grown old and no longer has relevance to anybody, even if it is an APT that gets into a system. So how do I verify that, even though I've insulated that data, that it was worth the resource that I've invested in protecting it? So once again, something that you may start dismissing or maybe assuming that is almost a foregone conclusion as a customer because you're taking this AI for granted now. But that said, all the while, you could be losing sight of those critical priorities in your organization. Okay, so now as we come to the end of the presentation, in a sense, you're left saying, well, what do I do? Like, what do I consider, or where do I go next? So there's some thoughts I want to leave you with here. And this slide is probably the biggest takeaway that you're going to want from this whole discussion, right? We've talked a lot about artificial intelligence. We've talked a lot about risk, but what's it all mean, right? So I think as technologists and as technology managers out there in the audience, we really want to think about how we're going to manage this technology. What are we going to do with it? And not only that, what kind of policy do we have around it? It's not just a technology piece. It's what we have written on paper and what we expect of our employees, of our organization, of our customers to behave, to feed the data in the system, or maybe there are people who are going to be using the results. We need to think about that, how we're going to manage that technology. You know, I think again about the current pandemic situation that we're in as an example here. This is the idea that if we had a policy to tell our people how to work remotely, we wouldn't have had a grand panic when everybody was forced to stay home in, you know, February, March timeframe. and we could have really thought through how to manage the technology that they were taking home with them and been a little bit more effective as some organizations go. AI is no different in this regard. Now, some thoughts here on how you could manage that and get the connection of policy and technology. I would recommend that you set up a technology council for your organization if you don't already have one. They need to be considering the ingestion of this artificial intelligence, and they should also have a real strong tie to your risk management program that you have in your organization. Maybe you have a strong enterprise risk management program. Maybe you have a strong risk management program within your CISO organization. Either way, those ties need to be strong between this technology council of subject matter experts and their discussion with risk management experts to understand how that uncertainty ties to the technology that you're bringing in and the decisions that you're making in your organization. Okay. So you also want to think about, well, where's the technology going to be implemented? Is it going to be within a certain function of my organization? What services will be impacted? What customers will be impacted? And you need to think about the appetite that you have for serving those customers and or possibly failing them, if you think about it, right? This technology is nothing more than doing human things and making decisions. It's just doing it a lot faster, right? Are you comfortable with that speed of the technology making those decisions? And in the time and place that that these decisions are being made, are you comfortable with the results that you're getting? Is your customer comfortable with the results that they're getting in that regard too? And finally, we don't want to walk away from the idea of continually revisiting the equation of that balance between the risk that you're taking and the results that you're getting, right? Am I getting a return on that risk investment in artificial intelligence? Does the business case still make sense? You could get to a point where we're talking about that data challenges part, where collection of that data is just so expensive that it's prohibitive in terms of what you're getting at it in terms of benefit, in terms of automating that decision being made versus having someone who just has some subject matter expertise and a nice strong governance structure that they could consult with, make the decision, and you can move along smartly. Now, I used a real powerful example with artificial intelligence and modifying and updating your control stack. That could be very much a place where there is a strong return on risk investment. But if that's the case, someone needs to continually revisit that model and make sure that the decisions being made are not hurting you in terms of your customer base, in terms of revenue, in terms of delivering those critical services that makes your organization go. Okay. So at the end of the day, I want to say that technology in terms of artificial intelligence isn't magical, right? There are a lot of cases where we've done this before. We've ingested other technologies, if you recall back in the day when mobile devices were coming in vogue, and we were trying to incorporate those more into our daily tasks and organizations. I remember myself owning a BlackBerry at one point. That was exciting, right? But before that was Palm Pods, and there was trying to figure out, well, how does this technology fit in the organization? What risks am I taking by having somebody take that home with them, right? We've kind of seen that before. How about another example would be cloud implementation. We've seen that technology come along now, and we've seen organizations kind of wrestle with the challenges there. What I'm here to say is whether it's artificial intelligence, cloud implementation, or mobile devices, there are a lot of common challenges here where we're trying to find the right people to answer the right question and understanding the bounds of that question and what our solution is trying to get to, okay? So I invite you to reach out to me. My name, once again, is Brett Tucker at the Software Engineering Institute. I'll leave you with my contact information here. Please feel free to ask any questions as you see fit. I'm happy to serve. Thanks for your time.